when a desperate half-native boy knocked on Miriam's door begging for water during the brutal 1885 Kansas drought. The widowed homesteader's simple act of mercy seemed like nothing more than basic human decency. But when 20 armed horsemen surrounded her cabin at dawn, led by the child's father seeking to repay a debt of honor, Miriam realized her small kindness had set in motion events that would either destroy her quiet life forever or give her the family she never knew she'd been waiting for. A woman's scream cut through the morning air like a knife through butter. But it wasn't coming from outside Miriam Thorne's cabin. It was coming from her own throat as she jolted awake from another nightmare about her dead husband. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly outside her small window, brown and cracked like old leather under the October sun of 1885. 3 months without rain had turned the once green grassland into a desert that seemed to mock every farmer who dared to call this place home. Miriam pressed her bare feet against the cold wooden floor and winced. Even her body ached differently now, like grief had settled into her very bones. At 34, she felt ancient, worn down by 2 years of living alone on this homestead 20 miles west of Dodge City. Another day, she whispered to herself, the same words she'd spoken every morning since Benjamin died. The phrase had become a prayer, a promise, and a threat all at once. The kitchen greeted her with familiar emptiness. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 spoon, everything measured out for a life that had shrunk to fit just her. She pumped water from the well, grateful that it still gave her a trickle, though each day brought less than the last. Coffee was a luxury she couldn't afford, but she made it anyway. Some mornings, the bitter warmth was the only thing that reminded her she was still alive. As the pot heated on her wood stove, she counted her supplies with the grim accuracy of someone who knew exactly how close to nothing she really was. Flour, maybe 2 weeks left if she was careful. Salt pork, enough for a few more meals. Dried beans, a handful. The vegetable garden behind her cabin had given up weeks ago, leaving only stubborn weeds that seemed to thrive on hardship. Through her window, she watched a hawk circle overhead, searching for prey in the dead grass. At least the bird had somewhere else to go when this place failed completely. Miriam had nowhere. This cabin, this land, these debts. They were all that remained of the life she'd built with Benjamin. She remembered how they'd laughed when they first saw this place. "We'll make it beautiful," Benjamin had promised, his strong hands gesturing toward the empty prairie. Green gardens, fat cattle, maybe even a proper fence. Now the fence posts stood crooked and broken, like tombstones marking the death of their dreams. The coffee finished brewing, filling the small room with its rich smell. Miriam poured herself a cup and stepped onto her front porch, letting the morning air wake her up properly. The silence out here was different from town silence. Deeper, older, like the earth itself was holding its breath. She'd grown up in Missouri, where trees and rivers broke up the landscape. This Kansas emptiness had frightened her at first, all that sky pressing down like a heavy blanket. But over 5 years of marriage, she'd learned to love it. The way sunrise painted the grassland gold. The way storms built slowly on the horizon, giving you time to prepare. The way you could see tomorrow's weather coming from miles away. Benjamin used to say the prairie was honest. "No secrets here," he'd tell her while they worked in their garden. "What you see is what you get." But the prairie had kept one terrible secret: how quickly it could take everything away. A movement in the distance caught her eye. Something small and dark was moving across the grassland, too far away to make out clearly. Probably just another hawk or maybe a coyote looking for water. Everything was looking for water these days. Miriam finished her coffee and went back inside to begin the daily ritual of making nothing last as long as possible. She mixed a small amount of flour with water to make a thin pancake, enough to fill her stomach without using up too much of her dwindling supplies. As she cooked, she thought about her neighbors, the Hendersons, who lived 8 miles south. They'd stopped by last week to say goodbye before heading back east to live with family. "This land's beaten us," Mr. Henderson had said, his proud shoulders slumped in defeat. "Maybe next year will be better for rain, but we can't wait to find out." Miriam had wanted to ask if she could go with them, but pride kept the words locked in her throat. Besides, where would she go? Her parents were dead, and she had no brothers or sisters to take her in. This empty cabin was still better than being a burden on strangers. The pancake cooked quickly in her iron skillet, golden brown and paper-thin. She ate it slowly, making each bite last, while she planned her day. Check the well for any overnight accumulation. Mend the holes in her winter dress. Maybe walk to the creek bed to see if yesterday's wind had uncovered any useful items that other families had left behind. Outside, the small dark shape she'd seen earlier was getting closer. Now she could tell it was walking on 2 legs, not 4. A person, moving slowly across the prairie toward her cabin. Miriam set down her fork and watched more carefully. The figure was small, a child, maybe, but what would a child be doing out here alone? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the road to town was in the opposite direction. As the figure got closer, she could see it was indeed a child, walking with the careful, measured steps of someone who'd learned to save their strength. The child would walk a few steps, then stop and rest, then continue on. Something about that determination made Miriam's chest tighten. She recognized that kind of stubborn courage, the kind that kept you moving when everything in your body wanted to give up. The child was heading straight for her cabin. The boy collapsed 3 feet from Miriam's front door, his small body hitting the ground like a dropped stone. She rushed outside without thinking, her bare feet hitting the sun-baked earth as she knelt beside him. Up close, she could see he was maybe 8 or 9 years old, with skin browned by sun and heritage she couldn't quite place. His clothes hung in tatters, a shirt that had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric, and pants that had been cut down from adult size. But it was his face that made her heart skip. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, there was something noble about his features, like he came from people who knew how to carry themselves with dignity even when they had nothing else. "Child?" she whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, pale blue like winter sky, startling against his dark skin. Those eyes focused on her face with an alertness that seemed too old for someone so young. "Water," he croaked, the word barely audible through cracked lips. "Please, ma'am." Miriam didn't hesitate. She scooped him up, surprised by how light he was, like a bird with hollow bones, and carried him into her cabin. Setting him carefully in her only chair, she grabbed her largest tin cup and filled it from her precious water supply. "Slow," she warned as she held the cup to his lips. "Too fast and you'll be sick." The boy drank with the careful control of someone who'd learned not to waste a single drop. When the cup was empty, he looked up at her with those startling blue eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. Might I have a little more?" His politeness in the face of such obvious need made something crack open in Miriam's chest. When had she last heard someone say, "Might I," instead of just demanding what they wanted? She refilled the cup, watching as he drank this one even more slowly than the first. His color was already improving, and she could see him gathering strength with each sip. "What's your name, child?" she asked, settling onto her bed since he occupied her only chair. "Samuel Crow Feather, ma'am." He set the empty cup down carefully, handling it like it was made of fine china instead of battered tin. "I thank you for your kindness." The name told her what she'd already guessed from his features. Mixed blood, native and settler combined. Such children often belonged fully to neither world, accepted by some and rejected by others depending on who was doing the judging. "Where are you coming from, Samuel? Where's your family?" A shadow crossed his young face. "My pa's got business to tend to. I was looking for help." Something in the way he said it made Miriam think there was more to the story, but she didn't push. The boy was clearly exhausted, and questions could wait. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Samuel's eyes brightened, but he shook his head. "The water's plenty, ma'am. I don't want to take more than I need." Again, that careful politeness that spoke of good raising. Whoever his parents were, they taught him manners that would make any mother proud. "Nonsense," Miriam said, standing up and moving toward her small pantry. "I was just about to fix some food anyway." It was a lie. She'd already eaten her one meal of the day, but something about this boy's quiet dignity made her want to give him what little she could. She mixed up another pancake, this one thicker than her own had been, and cooked it until it was golden and substantial. While it cooked, she noticed Samuel looking around her cabin with curious eyes, taking in the neatly arranged furniture, the clean scrubbed floor, the small touches that marked it as a home rather than just a shelter. "You live here alone, ma'am?" he asked. "I do. My husband passed 2 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss." The words came with the same mature dignity he'd shown since arriving. "This is a good home, clean and peaceful." Miriam felt an unexpected flush of pride. She'd worked hard to keep the cabin neat and welcoming, even with no one to welcome. Benjamin had always said a clean home showed respect for yourself and anyone who might visit. She flipped the pancake and glanced back at Samuel. His eyes had closed, and for a moment she thought he'd fallen asleep. But then they opened again, alert and watchful. "Samuel," she said gently, "how far did you walk to get here?" "A ways," he said, which wasn't really an answer. "And you're heading somewhere specific?" "Yes, ma'am. But I needed." He gestured toward the empty water cup. "I needed help first." The pancake was done. Miriam slid it onto her plate and handed it to him along with her only fork. "Eat up. You need your strength." Samuel accepted the food with quiet thanks and began eating slowly, savoring each bite like it might be his last. Miriam watched him and felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the simple pleasure of providing for someone else. "Ma'am," Samuel said between bites. "Why did you help me?" The question caught her off guard. "Why wouldn't I? Most folks." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Most folks see someone like me and decide I'm not worth their trouble." The matter-of-fact way he said it broke Miriam's heart. How many doors had this child knocked on before reaching hers? How many people had turned him away simply because of who his parents were? "Well," she said firmly, "they were wrong." Samuel finished eating and set the plate down with the same careful respect he'd shown the water cup. "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." He stood up, and Miriam realized he was preparing to leave. "Where will you go now?" she asked. "To finish what I started." He moved toward the door, then turned back. "Ma'am, my father will want to know about your kindness. He'll want to thank you proper." "That's not necessary, Samuel. I was glad to help." The boy studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing it. "He'll want to thank you anyway. That's just how he is." And then he was gone, walking back out into the prairie with the same determined pace he'd arrived with. Miriam stood in her doorway watching until he disappeared into the heat shimmer, a small figure swallowed by the endless grassland. Only then did she notice that her water bucket was nearly empty, and she'd just given away her largest portion of flour. But instead of the panic she expected to feel, there was something else. A warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. For the first time in 2 years, she'd been able to help someone who needed it more than she did. What she didn't know was that 20 pairs of eyes had been watching from the distant hills, and that her simple act of kindness had just changed everything. Thunder rolled across the prairie, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky, only the drumming of 20 horses' hooves hitting the earth like a war song. Miriam jerked awake in her narrow bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound grew louder and closer. Dawn light filtered through her small window, painting everything gray and uncertain. She scrambled to look outside and felt her blood turn to ice water. They surrounded her cabin in a perfect circle, these riders who seemed to have appeared from nowhere like spirits of the grassland itself. Steam rose from their horses' nostrils in the cool morning air, and the animals shifted restlessly, sensing their riders' tension. The men wore a mixture of clothing that told stories she couldn't quite read. Some in traditional native dress with feathers and beadwork, others in settler clothes with wide-brimmed hats and leather chaps. But they all carried themselves with the same quiet alertness of people who knew how to survive in a world that didn't always welcome them. At their center sat a man who commanded attention without saying a word. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat his black horse like he'd been born in the saddle. His long dark hair was braided with small bones and colored beads that caught the morning light. His face could have been carved from stone. High cheekbones, strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. But it was those eyes that made Miriam's breath catch in her throat. pale blue like winter sky, exactly like the boy who'd knocked on her door yesterday. Samuel's father. Miriam's hands shook as she pulled on her dress and tried to smooth her sleep-tangled hair. Through the window, she could see the riders hadn't moved. They simply waited with the patience of people who knew their presence alone sent a message. What message, though? Had she done something wrong by helping the boy? Were they angry that she'd delayed him? Or worse, had something happened to Samuel after he left her cabin? Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, Miriam stepped onto her small porch. The morning air was sharp with the promise of winter, and she pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. 20 pairs of eyes turned to study her, but it was the leader's gaze that held her attention. His blue eyes swept over her small cabin, her struggling garden, the weathered fence posts that marked her property line. She felt like he was reading her entire life story in those few moments. "You are the woman who gave water to my son," he said. His voice carried the weight of someone used to being listened to, speaking English with only the slightest accent that made certain words sound like music. "I am," Miriam replied, surprised that her voice came out steady. The man studied her for another long moment, then dismounted with fluid grace. His boots hit the ground without a sound, and she noticed how his men remained perfectly still, hands resting near their weapons but not threatening. This was discipline, not aggression. "I am Joseph Crow Feather," he said, walking toward her porch with slow, deliberate steps. "Samuel told me of your kindness." Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the way grief had carved shadows into his strong features. This was a man who'd seen too much loss, just like she had. "How is Samuel?" she asked, genuinely concerned. "He seemed so tired when he left." Something flickered across Joseph's face. Surprise, maybe, that her first question was about his son's welfare rather than her own safety. "He reached his destination," Joseph said carefully. "But he spoke of you with great respect. Said you treated him like family instead of—" He paused, choosing his words. "Instead of what many people see when they look at him." Miriam felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He was a polite, well-mannered boy. Any decent person would have helped him." "Would they?" Joseph's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Samuel knocked on 17 doors before yours. 17 people saw a thirsty child and turned him away." The weight of those words hit Miriam like a physical blow. 17 doors. 17 people who'd looked at a dying child and decided he wasn't worth their water or their time. "That's terrible," she whispered. "It is the world we live in," Joseph said simply. "But you chose differently. In my people's tradition, such kindness creates a debt that must be honored." Miriam's mind raced through every story she'd ever heard about Indian raids, every whispered tale of settlers who'd vanished in the night. But looking at this man, really looking, she saw something that didn't match the fearsome stories. There was pain in his eyes, the same hollow ache she recognized from her own mirror. "I don't need any payment," she said quickly. "I was glad to help." Joseph stepped closer, and she could see the intricate beadwork on his leather vest, the way his braids were woven with small silver ornaments that tinkled softly when he moved. "My son is dying," he said, the words falling between them like stones into still water. Miriam felt the air leave her lungs. "What?" "The white man's consumption has taken hold in his lungs. It grows stronger each day, stealing his breath bit by bit." Joseph's jaw tightened, and she could see the effort it took him to maintain his composure. "The doctor in Dodge City refused to see him, said he doesn't waste medicine on half-breeds, who probably won't live anyway." The casual cruelty of it made Miriam's stomach turn. She thought of Samuel's quiet dignity, the way he'd said please and thank you like her own mother had taught her. "That's horrible," she breathed. "It is," Joseph agreed. "But there is another doctor. A woman named Elizabeth Hartwell who runs a clinic 50 miles north, near the Smoky Hill River. She has new medicine that could save Samuel's life." Hope flared in Miriam's chest. "Then why haven't you taken him there?" Joseph's face hardened. "She will not treat him unless a white woman vouches for his character. Says too many of her supplies have been wasted, on Indians who disappear before finishing their treatment. Understanding crashed over Miriam like a cold wave. This wasn't about repaying a debt at all. It was about a father's desperate love for his dying child, and the bitter reality that mercy had become a rare commodity in this harsh land. "You want me to come with you," she said. "I am asking you to help save my son's life." Miriam looked at the 20 men surrounding her cabin, then back at Joseph's face. In his eyes, she saw the same desperate love she'd once felt for Benjamin during his final illness. The willingness to do anything, sacrifice anything, for just one more day together. But going with them meant leaving everything she knew, traveling into unknown country with people she just met. What if it was a trap? What if they meant her harm once they got her away from her cabin? As if reading her thoughts, Joseph spoke again. "If I meant you harm, would I have brought 20 witnesses? Would I have given you my true name? Would I have told you exactly where we were going and why?" His logic was sound, but fear still clawed at her throat. She'd been alone for 2 years, making every decision by herself, trusting no one. The thought of placing her life in someone else's hands terrified her almost as much as staying here to slowly starve. "How do I know you're telling the truth about Samuel being sick?" she asked. Without a word, Joseph turned and spoke rapidly to one of his men in a language she didn't recognize. The warrior nodded and rode to the edge of the circle, returning with a smaller horse that carried a bundle wrapped in blankets. It was Samuel, and even from a distance, Miriam could see how much worse he looked than yesterday. His skin had a grayish tinge, and his breathing was labored. Each cough shook his small frame like wind through dead leaves. "Dear God," she whispered. "Time is running short," Joseph said quietly. "Will you help us? I need to pack some things," Miriam heard herself saying, as if the words were coming from someone else's mouth. The transformation in Joseph's expression was immediate and startling. The stoic mask slipped away, revealing raw gratitude that made him look suddenly, achingly human. He pressed his hand to his heart and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that made Miriam's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "We will wait," he said simply. As Miriam turned to go back inside, she heard Joseph speaking rapidly to his men in their native tongue. Several of them dismounted and began moving around her property with quiet efficiency. One man led her milk cow to a shaded area and made sure she had fresh water. Another began gathering her scattered chickens and securing them in their coop. They were taking care of her animals without being asked. These supposed savages were showing more consideration for her property than most of her white neighbors ever had. Inside her cabin, Miriam stared at her few possessions and tried to decide what to take on a journey that might last weeks. Her hands shook as she folded her spare dress and her warmest shawl. She packed her few medical supplies, willow bark tea for pain, dried mint for stomach troubles, clean bandages made from torn sheets. As she worked, she could hear the soft sounds of the men outside preparing for travel. Their voices were quiet, respectful. Nothing like the wild whooping she'd expected from the stories she'd heard. A gentle knock on her door made her look up. One of the younger warriors stood there, holding the reins of a pretty chestnut mare with kind eyes and a comfortable-looking saddle. "For you," he said in careful English. "She is gentle, good for long ride." "Thank you," Miriam managed, touched by the thoughtfulness. The young man smiled, the first smile she'd seen from any of them. "I am Running Wolf, Joseph's nephew. Samuel is my cousin. We are grateful for your kindness to him." As she finished packing, Miriam caught sight of herself in her small mirror. The face looking back was harder than she remembered, carved by loss and loneliness into something she barely recognized. But there was something else there now, a spark of purpose that had been missing for far too long. She was about to do something that would have terrified her just yesterday. But watching a child die slowly while she did nothing would be worse than any danger she might face on the trail. Outside, Joseph was kneeling beside Samuel's horse, speaking quietly to his son. The boy's responses were barely whispers, punctuated by harsh coughing that made everyone within earshot wince. "Ready?" Joseph asked as Miriam emerged with her small bundle of belongings. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Running Wolf helped her mount the chestnut mare, adjusting the stirrups to fit her legs. The horse was indeed gentle, standing patiently while Miriam got used to the feeling of being in a saddle again. She hadn't ridden since Benjamin's death. "We will reach the doctor before sunset," Joseph said, mounting his own black stallion with fluid grace. "The trail is good, and we know the way." As they prepared to leave, Miriam took one last look at her cabin. It looked smaller somehow, less significant than it had an hour ago. All those months of clinging to this place, afraid to leave because it was all she had left of her old life. Now she was riding away with strangers, and instead of terror, she felt something that might have been relief. The column of riders moved out with military precision, forming a protective circle around Miriam and Samuel. She found herself riding beside Joseph, who kept glancing at his son with barely concealed worry. "Tell me about Dr. Hartwell," Miriam said as they settled into a steady pace across the prairie. "She came west 5 years ago from Boston," Joseph replied. "Lost her husband to cholera and decided to use her medical training to help frontier families. She's skilled, but—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "She has strong opinions about who deserves her help." "What kind of opinions?" "She believes some people are more worthy of saving than others. That medicine should go to those who will contribute to society, rather than those who will simply return to their savage ways." Joseph's voice carried no anger, just weary acceptance of a reality he'd learned to navigate. The casual cruelty of it made Miriam sick to her stomach. How could someone sworn to heal people make such terrible judgments about who deserved to live? "But she'll treat Samuel if I vouch for him?" "She will. Your word as a white woman carries weight that mine never could." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of hooves on hard ground and Samuel's labored breathing. Miriam found herself studying the men around her, noticing details that contradicted everything she'd been told about wild Indians. Their horses were well cared for, their equipment meticulously maintained. They rode with the easy confidence of people who'd spent their lives in the saddle, but there was nothing threatening about their demeanor. When they spoke to each other, their voices were quiet and respectful. "Joseph," she said finally, "why did you bring so many men just to ask for my help?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. 3 months ago, I rode alone to ask a white doctor for help. He had me beaten and thrown out of town. Said I was lucky he didn't have me hanged for threatening him." Joseph's hand moved unconsciously to his ribs, as if the memory still caused pain. "I learned that day that approaching white folks alone makes them see threat where none exists. But 20 men? That makes them see strength they must respect." The brutal logic of it made perfect sense, and Miriam felt ashamed of her earlier fear. These men weren't here to intimidate her. They were here to ensure she took their request seriously. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said quietly. Joseph glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features. "You are the first white person to say that to me." As they crested a low hill, the landscape began to change. The endless brown grass gave way to scattered cottonwoods, and Miriam could smell water in the air. The smoky hill river was getting closer. "Tell me about Samuel," she said, wanting to understand the boy she was risking everything to help. Joseph's stern features softened immediately. "He is curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. He speaks 3 languages, English, Cheyenne, and some Spanish he picked up from traders. He can read and write better than most white children his age." "Who taught him?" "His mother, before she died. She was a schoolteacher from Denver who fell in love with the wrong man." Joseph's voice carried old grief. "She died bringing him into the world, but not before making me promise he would have every opportunity to succeed in both worlds, white and Indian. You've kept that promise." "I've tried. But the world keeps reminding him that he belongs fully to neither place." Joseph looked toward his son, riding wrapped in blankets ahead of them. "Maybe that's why your kindness meant so much to him. You didn't see half-breed or Indian or white. You just saw a thirsty child." In the distance, smoke rose from a chimney, marking the location of Dr. Hartwell's clinic. Samuel's fate, and perhaps Miriam's own, would be decided in the next few hours. But for the first time in 2 years, Miriam felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Turn around and leave, or I'll have the sheriff arrest every one of you for trespassing. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell stood in the doorway of her clinic like a fortress guard. Her steel-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her pale skin. Her dark dress was spotless despite the frontier setting, and she held a rifle with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. Behind her, Miriam could see the interior of the clinic, whitewashed walls, gleaming medical instruments, and shelves lined with bottles of medicine that could save Samuel's life. So close, yet it might as well have been on the moon. Joseph sat perfectly still on his horse, showing no reaction to the weapon pointed at his chest. His men remained equally motionless, but Miriam could feel the tension crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. "Dr. Hartwell," Joseph said calmly, "I sent word ahead that we were coming. You agreed to see the boy if Mrs. Thorne would vouch for him. That was before I knew you'd bring an army," the doctor snapped, her grip tightening on the rifle. "I run a medical practice, not a fort under siege." Miriam urged her horse forward, positioning herself between the doctor and Joseph's men. "Dr. Hartwell, I'm Miriam Thorne. We've come a long way, and the child is very sick." The doctor's cold blue eyes swept over Miriam, taking in her worn dress and sun-weathered face. "You're the widow from down near Dodge City? The one who wrote asking for help with consumption treatment?" "I didn't write any letter," Miriam said, confused. Dr. Hartwell's eyes narrowed. "Then how did you know to come here? How did you know I had the new medicine?" Joseph spoke up quietly. "I sent the letter using Mrs. Thorne's name. I knew you wouldn't read it if it came from me." "You forged correspondence?" Dr. Hartwell's voice rose with indignation. "That's a federal crime, you know? So is letting a child die when you have the medicine to save him," Miriam said, surprising herself with her boldness. The doctor's gaze shifted back to her, studying her face with new interest. "And you're willing to vouch for this boy? Put your name behind his treatment?" "I am. Even though he's a half-breed? Even though his people might disappear into the wilderness the moment treatment gets difficult." The casual cruelty in Dr. Hartwell's voice made Miriam's stomach churn, but she kept her expression steady. "His name is Samuel, and he's a child who needs help. That's all that matters to me." Dr. Hartwell lowered her rifle slightly. "You realize the treatment takes months? He'll need to stay here, take medicine daily, eat proper food. It's expensive and time-consuming." "We can pay," Joseph said, reaching into a leather pouch at his belt. He pulled out a handful of silver coins that gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Spanish silver, worth more than your usual payment." The doctor's eyes widened at the sight of the coins. Miriam could see her practical nature warring with her prejudices. "Where did you get Spanish silver?" Dr. Hartwell asked suspiciously. "Honest trade," Joseph replied simply. "We guide wagon trains through mountain passes that only we know. The silver comes from grateful travelers who reached California safely." It was a revelation that surprised Miriam. She'd assumed Joseph and his men lived by hunting and raiding, like the stories suggested. Instead, they were guides and protectors, helping settlers reach their destinations. Dr. Hartwell seemed to be considering their offer, but her expression remained skeptical. "Even if I agree to treat the boy, how do I know you won't cause trouble? 20 armed men camping outside my clinic would drive away other patients." "We won't be camping here," Joseph said. "Once Samuel begins treatment, Mrs. Thorne will stay to monitor his progress. My men and I will return home until he's well enough to travel." "Wait," Miriam said, turning to stare at Joseph. "You want me to stay here? For months?" "Samuel trusts you," Joseph explained, "and Dr. Hartwell trusts white women more than she trusts us. You're the bridge that makes this possible." The weight of what he was asking hit Miriam like a physical blow. Leave her cabin, her life, everything familiar, to stay in this strange place and care for a boy she'd known for one day? But then she thought about Samuel, wrapped in blankets and struggling to breathe. She thought about 17 doors that had turned him away, 17 people who'd decided he wasn't worth their compassion. "All right," she heard herself saying. "I'll stay." Dr. Hartwell looked surprised by Miriam's quick agreement. "You understand this is a serious commitment? The boy will need constant care. Someone to make sure he takes his medicine, eats properly, gets rest. It's not easy work." "I understand." The doctor studied her for another long moment, then sighed and stepped aside. "Bring the boy in. Let me examine him properly." Joseph dismounted and carefully lifted Samuel from his horse. The boy was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. As Joseph carried him toward the clinic, Miriam saw tears glisten in the strong man's eyes, the first crack in his stoic armor. Inside the clinic, Dr. Hartwell's demeanor changed completely. Whatever her personal prejudices, she was clearly a skilled physician. She examined Samuel with gentle hands, listening to his chest, checking his pulse, looking at his fingernails and the inside of his mouth. "Advanced tuberculosis," she confirmed, washing her hands in a basin. "Without treatment, he has perhaps 2 weeks. Maybe less." Joseph's face went pale beneath his weathered tan. "And with treatment? The new medicine, streptomycin, can cure consumption if we catch it in time. But it's a long process. 3 months of daily injections plus careful diet and rest. And it's expensive." "How expensive?" Joseph asked. $50 for the full course of medicine, plus room and board for the boy and Mrs. Thorne. Joseph didn't hesitate. He poured the silver coins onto Dr. Hartwell's examination table, the metal ringing like bells. "Will this cover it?" Dr. Hartwell's eyes widened as she counted the coins. "This is worth at least $70. Where did you really get this?" "I told you, honest trade. We also hunt and sell furs, break horses for cavalry units, sometimes work as scouts for the army." Joseph's voice carried quiet pride. "We do whatever it takes to survive in your world, while keeping our dignity in ours." The doctor seemed taken aback by his directness. She looked from the silver to Samuel's pale face, then to Miriam's determined expression. "Very well," she said finally. "We'll begin treatment immediately. But I warn you, if the boy doesn't respond to the medicine, or if there are any complications, I won't be held responsible." "We understand," Miriam said quickly, before Joseph could respond. "When do we start?" Dr. Hartwell moved to her medicine cabinet and began preparing a syringe. "Right now. The sooner we begin, the better his chances." As she drew the medicine into the syringe, Miriam felt a strange mixture of hope and terror. They'd come so far, risked so much, all based on the word of a woman who clearly resented having to treat Samuel at all. But it was their only chance. Samuel's scream cut through the quiet clinic like a knife, making Miriam's heart lurch with panic. She rushed to his bedside, where Dr. Hartwell was holding him down as his small body convulsed with fever. His skin burned like fire under her touch, and his eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. "What's happening to him?" Miriam demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "Reaction to the medicine," Dr. Hartwell said grimly, not taking her eyes off Samuel's face. "Some patients get worse before they get better. His body is fighting both the disease and the cure." 3 days had passed since they'd arrived at the clinic. 3 days of watching Samuel grow weaker instead of stronger, despite the daily injections of the expensive medicine. Miriam had barely slept, staying by his bedside and trying to get him to eat small spoonfuls of broth. Joseph had left the morning after Samuel's treatment began, taking his men back toward their territory as promised. But not before pulling Miriam aside for a conversation that still echoed in her mind. "If my son dies," he had said quietly, "it won't be your fault. You've done more for him than anyone else ever has." "He's not going to die," Miriam had replied with more confidence than she felt. Now, watching Samuel's fever burn through his fragile body, she wondered if her confidence had been misplaced. Dr. Hartwell released her grip on Samuel as his convulsions stopped. His breathing was rapid and shallow, like a bird's. "We need to cool him down. Help me strip these blankets off." They worked together to remove Samuel's heavy coverings, Then Dr. Hartwell brought a basin of cool water and clean cloths. "Keep wiping his face and arms," she instructed. "The fever has to break, or—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Miriam understood. If the fever didn't break, Samuel would die despite all their efforts. For the next 6 hours, Miriam bathed Samuel's burning skin with cool water while Dr. Hartwell checked on him regularly. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words in a language Miriam didn't understand, probably Cheyenne, the tongue his father had taught him. "Tell me about his mother," Miriam said during one of Dr. Hartwell's visits, needing to talk to keep from going crazy with worry. The doctor paused in her examination of Samuel's pulse. "I never met her, but I heard stories when I first came to Kansas. Sarah Mitchell was her name. Came out from Denver to teach school in one of the farming settlements. Fell in love with Joseph Crowfeather when he guided her wagon train west. What happened to her? Same thing that happens to too many women out here. Died in childbirth with no proper medical help." Dr. Hartwell's voice carried unexpected sadness. "By all accounts, she was a remarkable woman. Spoke 4 languages, had college education, could have married any man she wanted back east. But she chose Joseph. Love doesn't always make practical sense," Dr. Hartwell said, then seemed surprised by her own words. "Anyway, she made Joseph promise the boy would get a proper education. That's why he speaks such good English, why he knows how to read and write." Miriam continued bathing Samuel's fevered skin, thinking about a woman she'd never met who'd given up everything comfortable and safe for love. In some ways, Sarah Mitchell's story wasn't so different from her own. Both women who'd followed their hearts to the harsh Kansas frontier. "Dr. Hartwell," Miriam said carefully, "why did you really agree to treat Samuel? I know it wasn't just the money." The doctor was quiet for so long that Miriam thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I had a son once, back in Boston before I came west." She paused, her hands stilling on Samuel's wrist as she checked his pulse. "Tommy was about Samuel's age when the consumption took him. I was a doctor, supposedly skilled in healing, but I couldn't save my own child. The admission hung between them like a bridge across a deep canyon. I came to Kansas thinking I could start over, help people who really needed it. But somewhere along the way, I started deciding who deserved help and who didn't. Started thinking some lives were worth more than others." Dr. Hartwell looked directly at Miriam for the first time in hours. "Watching you fight for this boy reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That every child is someone's whole world." Around midnight, Samuel's fever finally broke. His skin cooled under Miriam's touch, and his breathing deepened into natural sleep instead of the restless tossing that had worried them both. "The crisis has passed," Dr. Hartwell said, checking his pulse again. "His heartbeat is stronger, more regular. I think the medicine is finally winning." Miriam felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill down her cheeks. "He's going to be all right? It looks that way, but he'll need weeks more of treatment and careful nursing. Are you prepared for that?" Miriam looked down at Samuel's peaceful face, thinking about the long journey that had brought them all to this moment. A simple cup of water given to a thirsty child had led to this. Sitting beside a sickbed in a frontier clinic, caring for a boy who wasn't her son but felt like family nonetheless. "I'm prepared," she said firmly. Over the following days, Samuel grew stronger. His appetite returned, and he began staying awake for longer periods. He was shy at first around Dr. Hartwell, but gradually warmed up to her gentle bedside manner. "Mrs. Miriam," he said one afternoon as she spooned broth into his mouth, "why did you come with us? You barely knew me." The question caught her off guard. How could she explain the empty ache that had filled her chest for 2 years, or the way helping him had made her feel human again? "Sometimes," she said carefully, "we meet people who need something we can give, and sometimes, giving that help heals something broken inside us too." Samuel considered this with the serious expression he wore when thinking through difficult ideas. "Like my pa says, helping others helps ourselves?" Exactly like that. As Samuel's health improved, Miriam found herself settling into a routine at the clinic. She helped Dr. Hartwell with other patients, learning basic medical skills she'd never thought she'd need. In return, the doctor taught her about medicines and treatments that could help people in isolated places like her homestead. But late at night, when Samuel was sleeping peacefully and the clinic was quiet, Miriam wondered what would happen when he was well enough to go home. Would she return to her empty cabin and her solitary life? Or had this experience changed her in ways that couldn't be undone? The answer would come sooner than she expected. A gunshot shattered the morning quiet, followed by angry shouting that made Miriam's blood run cold. She rushed to the clinic window and saw a mob of 20 men on horseback surrounding Dr. Hartwell's property. But these weren't Joseph's disciplined warriors. These were rough-looking settlers with hatred burning in their eyes and whiskey courage fueling their voices. "Come out here, Doc!" shouted their leader. A heavy-set man with a scraggly beard and clothes that reeked of unwashed sweat even from a distance. "We know you got that half-breed kid in there." Dr. Hartwell appeared beside Miriam at the window, her face pale but determined. "That's Tom Briggs," she whispered. "Owns the largest ranch in the area. He's been stirring up trouble ever since word got out about Samuel." "What kind of trouble?" Miriam asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The kind that ends with people getting hurt." Dr. Hartwell moved away from the window and began gathering medical supplies. "Take Samuel and hide in the back room. There's a root cellar behind the pantry. You can both fit if you're careful." "I'm not hiding," Miriam said firmly. "This is about me as much as Samuel. I'm the one who vouched for him." Before Dr. Hartwell could argue, Tom Briggs's voice boomed across the yard again. "We know you're in there, Mrs. Thorne. Come out and face what you've done." Samuel appeared in the doorway of his room, moving carefully but no longer the skeleton he'd been weeks ago. The medicine had worked its miracle. His cheeks had color again, and his breathing was clear and strong. "They're here because of me," he said quietly. "I should go talk to them." "Absolutely not," both women said at the same time. "Samuel, you're still recovering," Dr. Hartwell added. "And those men aren't interested in talking." Through the window, Miriam could see more riders approaching from the south. Her heart sank as she counted them. At least 15 more, all armed and all looking like they'd come prepared for violence. "What do they want?" she asked. "To run us all out of the territory," Dr. Hartwell replied grimly. "Briggs has been telling everyone that treating Indians will bring war parties to the area. Says I'm putting all the white settlers at risk." The irony wasn't lost on Miriam. Joseph had brought 20 men to ask for help peacefully, and now 30 white men had come with guns to prevent that help from continuing. "Dr. Hartwell," Tom Briggs shouted. "You got 5 minutes to send that Indian boy and his white woman friend packing, or we're coming in after them." "White woman friend?" Miriam repeated, anger flaring in her chest. "Is that what I am now?" She moved toward the front door, but Dr. Hartwell grabbed her arm. "Don't go out there. They're looking for an excuse to get violent." "Then what do you suggest we do? Hide until they burn the clinic down around us?" Before Dr. Hartwell could answer, a new sound reached them, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats from the north. Miriam's heart leaped as she recognized the precise formation of Joseph's warriors, riding hard toward the clinic. "Oh no," Dr. Hartwell breathed. "If Joseph's men clash with Briggs's mob, innocent people will die." Miriam made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She walked to the front door and stepped outside, ignoring both Dr. Hartwell's protests and Samuel's worried cry. "Tom Briggs," she called out, her voice carrying across the tense silence. "I'm Miriam Thorne, and I want to talk to you." The heavy-set rancher urged his horse closer, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Well, the Indian lover herself. "You got some nerve, lady." "I've got something better than nerve," Miriam replied, stepping down from the porch. "I've got common sense. Something you seem to be lacking." A murmur ran through Briggs's men at her boldness. In the distance, she could see Joseph's warriors taking positions on the surrounding hills, close enough to intervene if needed, but not close enough to provoke immediate violence. "Common sense." Briggs laughed harshly. "Lady, you brought a war party to our doorstep. You think we're stupid enough to let that slide? I brought a sick child to get medical treatment, Miriam corrected. The same treatment any white child would receive without question. That ain't no white child, and you know it. You're right, Miriam said, taking another step forward. Samuel is better than most white children I've met. He's polite, respectful, and grateful for kindness. Unlike some people I could mention. Briggs's face darkened with anger. You think you're smart, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, widow woman. You've overstayed your welcome in this territory. Time for you to pack up and get moving. Or what? The voice came from behind Miriam, and she turned to see Dr. Hartwell stepping out of the clinic with her rifle in hand. You'll shoot a woman for showing compassion to a sick child? If that's what it takes to keep our families safe, Briggs snarled. Safe from what? Dr. Hartwell demanded. From a boy who can barely walk around the clinic without getting tired? From his father, who paid for treatment with honest money and left peacefully when asked. Safe from the war parties that'll come looking for revenge when that boy dies. The boy isn't going to die, Miriam said firmly. He's getting better every day, thanks to proper medicine and care. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Briggs's face. What do you mean, getting better? Samuel appeared in the clinic doorway, moving slowly but under his own power. The transformation from the dying child who'd arrived weeks ago was remarkable. He looked like any healthy boy his age, with bright eyes and steady breathing. I mean, the medicine worked, Dr. Hartwell said. Samuel is cured. In another week, he'll be strong enough to go home with his father. The news seemed to deflate some of the tension from Briggs's men. They'd come expecting to find a dangerous situation, but instead they saw a recovered child and two women who'd committed no crime beyond showing mercy. Don't matter, Briggs said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Indians are Indians. Can't trust them. Then how do you explain this? Joseph's voice carried across the clearing as he rode into view, alone and unarmed. His men remained on the hills, visible but not threatening. He dismounted and walked toward the group, his hands open and empty. Tom Briggs, isn't it? I believe we've met before. Briggs's face went pale beneath his scraggly beard. Yeah, I remember you. Do you remember the blizzard 3 winters ago? When your cattle got trapped in Devil's Canyon? The rancher's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. I remember, Joseph continued calmly. My men and I spent 2 days digging your animals out of the snow, saved nearly your entire herd. You offered to pay us, but I said your gratitude was payment enough. A murmur ran through both groups of men. Clearly, this was news to many of Briggs's followers. That was different, Briggs mumbled. Was it? Or is it only different when you need something from us? Joseph looked around at the assembled men, his pale blue eyes taking in each face. My son came here sick and dying. Mrs. Thorne and Dr. Hartwell saved his life. Now he's well and soon will go home. Where is the threat in that? The threat is in setting precedent, Briggs said, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. You start treating Indians like equals, and pretty soon they'll expect equal treatment everywhere. Heaven forbid, Dr. Hartwell said dryly. Joseph studied Briggs for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand your fear, Tom. Change is frightening, especially when you've built your life on things staying the same. He turned to address the entire group. But my son's recovery doesn't threaten your families. It threatens nothing except the idea that some children matter less than others. Samuel stepped forward, moving with the careful dignity Miriam had noticed from their first meeting. Mr. Briggs, sir? I wanted to thank you. The rancher looked startled. Thank me? For what? For helping me understand something important. Samuel's young voice carried clearly across the silent clearing. My father taught me that hatred usually comes from fear, and fear usually comes from not understanding. You were afraid of me because you didn't know me. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But now you can see I'm just a boy who was sick and got better, just like any other boy would. The simple truth of it seemed to hang in the air like morning mist, touching everyone present. Briggs looked around at his men, then at Joseph's warriors on the hills, then at Samuel's earnest young face. Some of the anger seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a tired man who'd perhaps realized he'd come prepared for a war that didn't actually exist. "You're leaving soon?" he asked Joseph. "As soon as Samuel is strong enough to travel safely." "And you won't be back?" "Not unless we're invited," Joseph replied simply. Briggs nodded slowly, then turned his horse around. "Mount up, boys. Nothing to see here." As the mob dispersed, Miriam felt her knees go weak with relief. She'd been prepared for violence, for bloodshed, for the kind of confrontation that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Instead, she'd witnessed something she'd never expected: the power of simple truth to dissolve even the deepest prejudices. But as she watched Tom Briggs ride away, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. 6 months later, Miriam stood on her porch watching the sunrise paint the Kansas sky in shades of rose and gold. But this morning felt different from all the others since her return. The drought had finally broken in December, blessed winter rains filling her well with sweet, clear water and turning the prairie green again. Her garden, replanted in early spring, was already showing promising shoots of corn, beans, and squash pushing through the rich black earth. But the real change wasn't in the weather or the crops. It was in the sounds drifting across the morning air. "Aunt Miriam!" Samuel's voice called from the creek that now ran year-round thanks to the return of regular rainfall. "The fish are biting good today." She smiled and waved toward the boy, who stood knee-deep in the clear water with a fishing pole in his hands and joy written across his healthy face. At 9 years old now, he'd grown several inches since his recovery, and the hollow-cheeked waif who'd knocked on her door that desperate October day was just a memory. "Tell your father I'll have biscuits ready when you get back," she called. Samuel grinned and waved his fishing pole in acknowledgement before turning back to the serious business of outwitting the creek's population of catfish and bass. The sound of hammering from the north reminded Miriam of the other major change in her life. Joseph and his family had settled on a plot of land just 2 miles away, close enough for daily visits but far enough to maintain their independence and dignity. The arrangement had raised eyebrows in town at first, but time had a way of normalizing even the most unusual situations. Joseph's skills as a guide and translator had proven valuable to the growing number of settlers heading west, and his reputation for honest dealing had gradually won over even some of his former critics. Dr. Hartwell had played a crucial role in that acceptance. Her public endorsement of Joseph's character, combined with Samuel's obvious intelligence and good manners, had helped convince the community that not all Indians fit the fearsome stereotypes they'd grown up believing. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Miriam look up from her coffee cup. Joseph rode into view on his black stallion, but this morning he wasn't alone. A young Cheyenne woman rode beside him, her long dark hair braided with colorful ribbons, and her clothing a beautiful mixture of traditional beadwork and practical frontier wear. "Morning, Miriam," Joseph called as he dismounted. "I'd like you to meet someone special." The woman dismounted with fluid grace, her intelligent dark eyes taking in Miriam's cabin and garden with obvious approval. She was perhaps 25, with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested she was comfortable in her own skin. "This is Morning Star," Joseph said, and the way he looked at her made Miriam's heart warm with understanding. "She's agreed to be my wife." "Congratulations," Miriam said, genuinely pleased. "Joseph, you deserve happiness." Morning Star stepped forward and surprised Miriam by taking her hands in a gesture of friendship. "Samuel has told me much about you," she said in careful English. "You saved his life and gave our family hope when we had none." "I just did what anyone would do," Miriam replied, though she knew by now that wasn't true. "No," Morning Star said firmly. "You did what few would do. You saw past differences to the person underneath. That is a rare gift." As they talked, Samuel came running up from the creek with a string of fish and a grin that could have lit up the entire prairie. "Look what I caught. Enough for everyone." The morning turned into an impromptu celebration as Morning Star proved to be an excellent cook, preparing the fish with wild herbs that added flavors Miriam had never tasted. Joseph shared news from town. More settlers arriving, new businesses opening, talk of eventually building a school. Samuel could attend, he mentioned casually. If he wants to. The boy looked up from his plate, considering the idea seriously. Would I be the only Indian student? Probably, Joseph admitted. Then I should go, Samuel said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that still amazed Miriam. Someone has to be first. Might as well be me. After the meal, Joseph and Morning Star prepared to leave, but not before Joseph pulled Miriam aside for a private conversation. I have something for you, he said, reaching into a leather pouch at his belt. He pulled out an intricately beaded bracelet, its colors catching the afternoon sunlight like jewels. It's beautiful, Miriam breathed, accepting the gift with reverence. Morning Star made it. She said every woman who helps raise a child deserves to be honored as a mother. Joseph's voice carried deep emotion. You gave Samuel more than medicine and care. You gave him the knowledge that he's worthy of love from people who don't share his blood. Miriam felt tears prick her eyes as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. He gave me something too. He reminded me that love isn't limited by blood or circumstances. It's a choice we make every day. As they prepared to leave, Samuel ran up and hugged Miriam tightly. Will you come to the wedding? He asked. Wouldn't miss it, she promised. After they rode away, Miriam settled into the rocking chair Benjamin had made for her during their first year of marriage. The chair had sat empty for 2 years after his death, but now it felt like coming home every time she sat in it. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the bitter isolation of grief to the unexpected joy of found family. She'd learned that kindness wasn't a finite resource to be hoarded like water in a drought. The more you gave away, the more you seemed to have. A letter had arrived from Dr. Hartwell the previous week, asking if Miriam would consider helping at the clinic on a regular basis. The doctor had been training her in basic medical skills during Samuel's recovery, and she discovered an aptitude for healing that surprised them both. Your hands have the gentleness that comes from understanding suffering, Dr. Hartwell had written. That's something that can't be taught, only lived. The offer represented a new chapter in Miriam's life, a chance to turn her own painful experiences into help for others. She'd already decided to accept. As the sun climbed higher into the cloudless sky, Miriam rocked gently and listened to the sounds of her transformed world. The creek bubbling over smooth stones, birds singing in the cottonwoods that Joseph had helped her plant, the distant laughter of children playing in a community that was slowly learning to embrace differences instead of fearing them. She'd started this journey as a woman who believed she had nothing left to give. Now she understood that she'd been wrong. The capacity for love and kindness had always been there, waiting for the right moment to bloom. That moment had come in the form of a thirsty boy with winter sky eyes and a dignity that shamed grown men. In saving Samuel, she'd discovered that she'd been a mother all along. She'd just been waiting for her family to find her. The sound of more laughter carried on the morning breeze as Samuel's voice mixed with his father's and Morning Star's near the creek. Miriam smiled and closed her eyes, feeling the sun warm her face and the blessed weight of belonging settle around her shoulders like a comfortable shawl. She'd learned something important in the months since that desperate October morning. Home wasn't a place you came from or a building you lived in. Home was the people who saw your worth when you couldn't see it yourself, who stood by you when the world turned hostile, who chose to love you not despite your flaws but because of your willingness to love them back. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of abundant harvests to come. Miriam opened her eyes and looked out at the endless sky, no longer seeing emptiness but possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose kindness over fear, love over prejudice. But today, in this moment, she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the family she'd found in the most unexpected places, watching the sun rise on a world that had remembered how to be generous. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.